watch the situation in the Middle East. Oil prices highest level since July 2022. Live now, Paula Hancock is following every step of the developments of the Middle East from Abu Dhabi. Paula, what do we know about this, about Cook Island, and also why it's so significant to the United States?
Well, Paulo, this is an island that is really key to the ability of Iran to be able to export its crude product. As you say, 90% of crude exports are from this particular island. It's a tiny island. It's about 5 miles, 7 kilometers. And what we know from the Iranian side, we heard just from the parliamentary speaker saying that they would abandon all restraint if there was any aggression against Iranian islands. Now, clearly, everyone in the region is bracing itself for whether or not there will be retaliation from Iran for the U.S. decision to bomb that island. Now, what we've heard from the U.S. side is that they have just eliminated the military aspect of the island. So the military targets have been taken out, according to the U.S. President Donald Trump, and they have not touched the energy infrastructure. They've not touched the facilities that would be needed to continue the oil production on that island. We've heard from President Trump saying, for reasons of decency, we have chosen not to wipe out all oil infrastructure on the island. But we have been hearing from Iranian officials that if energy infrastructure was targeted in Iran, then they would do the same in the rest of the Gulf. To be fair, that's a kind of a belated response, because they have already targeted a large number of energy infrastructure in the Gulf nations. Just a quick look at what else we have been seeing in neighboring countries in the Middle East. In Baghdad, we saw that the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, in the vicinity of that compound or within the compound, there has been a strike. We understand from Reuters, they have quoted security officials saying that it was a missile strike. We have reached out to the State Department to find out exactly what it was. We can see plumes of smoke and fire emanating from there. It's one of the biggest U.S. embassies in the world. It's within the so-called green zone, which is supposed to be the more heavily protected area. And it has come under repeated missile and drone attack by Iranian proxies for a long time now. We've also been seeing protests outside this embassy in recent days. Now, there were no... In many other countries, in fact, Oman is another country where they have just ordered non-emergency staff to leave the country. Significant because Oman, of course, was the mediator between the US and Iran before these hostilities started. They were the ones that had brokered the negotiations between the two sides. And yet even they are finding themselves on the receiving end of Iranian retaliation. Now, we've also seen in Dubai, here in the UAE, another interception of a projectile has caused debris which has damaged a building. We've seen that over recent days. In Qatar, a missile was intercepted on the way to the military base. And in Saudi Arabia, some 19 drones have been intercepted. Olive.
CNN's Paula Hancock to come back to this if you get more information on the situation in Baghdad. Lebanon's capital is currently reeling from the latest round of Israeli strikes as the fighting shows of letting up. The Israeli military has now been bombarding Beirut after it says that Hezbollah militants fired rockets toward Israeli territory. But it's often Lebanese civilians who end up in the crosshairs of Israeli strikes. Lebanon now says that about 700 people have been killed since the war started. But Israel is now raising the stakes, telling its military to prepare to expand its ground operations in Lebanon. I want to get more analysis on the developing situation right now. All right, let's get back to a story that we're closely following out of the Middle East as the U.S. and Israeli war with Iran enters now yet another week. Video geolocated by CNN showing flames and smoke rising from a building near the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. This is video that came in just a short while ago. It's still unclear If the compound itself was directly hit, you can see the flames and the smoke. CNN has already contacted the U.S. State Department for any further comment. We continue to do so to get more information. Gulf states are trying to fend off fresh strikes on their territory. And this is President Donald Trump says the U.S., quote, totally obliterated every military target on Iran's Karg Island, which actually handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. This follows the strike. Iran is now warning that any attack on its energy infrastructure will lead to retaliatory strikes on regional facilities with ties to the United States. For more now, I want to bring in CNN producer Matthias Grez, who is live from Doha. Matthias, welcome back. I've been following your reporting on what life is like there in Doha just a few days ago. Now, as we enter yet another week of this war, what's it like today?
Well, Polo, it had been a relatively quiet 36 hours or so here in Doha. The last alert of any kind any of us received on our phones was around midday on Thursday. But that all changed around midnight last night. The first in a series of incidents was an evacuation order issued by the Ministry of Interior to people's phones here to evacuate a couple of different areas in the city. And then at around 1:30 last night, a security alert was sent to people's phones, quickly followed by a really loud series of explosions. And then again, just before 6 a.m. this morning, another security alert and more explosions. And I have to say, those explosions last night, in particular, the ones at 1:30 in the morning, were among the loudest, if not the loudest, that we've heard so far here in Doha's West Bay. I mean, the force with which it shook my building at 1:30 was quite incredible. And actually, just before you came to us about half an hour ago, we saw a gun-mounted helicopter patrolling the skies here in Doha's West Bay. This area, of course, is where CNN's based. It's where a lot of the team is based. And it's a really popular commercial and residential area, both for locals and for tourists. And actually, a few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense here confirmed that it had been subjected to 2 separate missile attacks overnight. But this is something we're seeing now play out across the region. Authorities in Dubai confirmed that a successful drone intercept, debris from that intercept, had struck a building in the city, but no casualties and no fire. In Oman, the US issued a statement saying that all non-essential government personnel and their families should leave the country. And Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense over the last few hours has confirmed that it has intercepted at least 19 drones and 1 missile. We've also seen explosions in Kuwait and heard sirens in Bahrain. All of this, like you mentioned at the top, coming after Iran threatened retaliatory strikes after those US strikes on Karg Island.
Yeah, it still continues to be a very fluid situation there where you are. Matthias Grez, as always, thank you so much for all your reporting there from Doha. And as that war with Iran spreads across the Middle East, a humanitarian crisis continues to grow. In fact, in Iran, the UN now says that up to 3.2 million people have been temporarily displaced as families flee Tehran and also their surrounding areas there in search of safety. And as Israel expands operations against Hezbollah within Lebanon, more than 800,000 people have already been forced from their homes. Experts now saying that additional evacuation orders there could push that number past 1 million in the coming days. And then there's UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who actually visited Beirut on Friday. He said that the scale of suffering there, that it is devastating.
Today, it really breaks my heart to see the Lebanese people suffering so much. 800,000 displaced, 1,500 dead, in an absolutely dramatic situation. And my message is very clear. We must stop this war.
And aid groups, they are warning that the number of displaced across the region will continue to climb.
US President now speaking to reporters at Joint Base Andrews. Let's listen in.
Gasoline, gas, anything having to do with energy, as soon as this is ended. But we had to end the nuclear threat in the Middle East and throughout the world. We will have done that. Mr. President. me, it means very simply that we are in a position of dominance that nobody's ever seen before. And whether or not they're able to say the words or whether or not they're able to fight, their Navy is gone, their Air Force is gone, most of the military is gone, their big threat is gone in every way. They have no radar, they have no anti-aircraft weapons, for the most part, weapons and for indefinitely, they have no way of determining what they call visibility. So just about everything is gone, and you'll see that. But today we've had some very, very big hits, very powerful hits.
Mr. President, when will the Navy start escorting tankers to the Straits of
It'll happen soon.
Mr. President?
I have, and we're discussing a couple of different things. Not only that, but
Mr. President, on the SAVE Act, if Leader Thune cannot whip up the Republican support to either nuke the filibuster, reopen the government and pass the SAVE Act, or somehow
it's not called the SAVE Act, it's called the
Save America Act, you're right, sir. Do you think if Leader Thune can't accomplish that, do you think the Senate needs a new leader?
Well, it's certainly a very popular thing. I don't think there's ever been a bill that's more popular than the Save America. It's voter ID, it's a proof of citizenship, it's things that are so popular. No men and women sports, no transgender utilization of our children. So many different things. It's so good. No running around with the mail-in ballot nonsense that's gone on for so long that no other country does. No other country. We're going to clean up our elections. I don't think I've ever been involved in anything that's had the support of the Save America Act. So we'll see what happens.
Walk into Super Saver and discover a welcoming shopping experience where low prices meet high quality. Start at our wall of values for the week's best deals. Then explore fresh meat, produce, deli, and bakery favorites. Don't miss our customer favorites like donuts, fried chicken, and smokehouse sausage, or our fresh made tortilla.
Bad shape, just like the wall, just like the border, just like everything else in our country. It was all in bad shape. But I rebuilt the military in my first term, and we're using it in this term, for the sake of good, for the sake of peace, and for the sake of safety and good. I think of a lot.
How long now do you think the war is likely to last?
I can't tell you that. I mean, I have my own idea, but what good does it do? It'll be as long as it's necessary. They've been decimated. Their country's in bad shape. The whole thing is collapsing. If you read some of the fake news, it's like, oh, they're doing wonderfully. They're not doing wonderfully. They're doing the opposite. They're doing as bad as you can have. I would say this. I won't give you time, but we're way ahead of schedule.
And can you comment on
Militarily, we're way ahead of schedule.
Sir, you made a post about Claudia Sheinbaum refusing your help in Mexico. What's your plan with Mexico?
Well, she should not have refused my help. I offered to get rid of the cartels in Mexico, and for some reason she doesn't want to do that. I like her much, but she should get rid of the cartels because the cartels are, whether we like it or not, the cartels are running Mexico. We can't have that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You've just been listening there to President Trump as he departs Maryland for the weekend, heading down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida. He was asked quite a few questions there about the war in Iran and, of course, about oil prices. He said oil prices will start tumbling down as soon as the war is over, but he couldn't give any indication about when that would be. He said the war will continue as long as necessary. He added that he believes they are ahead of schedule. And he said the U.S. is in a position of dominance. He claimed that in his first term in office as U.S. president, he rebuilt the military, and this term he is using it for peace. He couldn't give any indication on when there'll be military escorts for tanks in the Strait of Hormuz, although he did say it will happen soon. We are going to continue to follow this story closely. War is mounting. It's now over 2,000 people killed according to CNN estimates, as the conflict approaches a third week. Most of those deaths are in Iran and Lebanon. But more families here in the United States are now grieving. The U.S. military tanker that had to make an emergency landing in Israel, but another refueling plane went down in Iraq, killing all 6 Americans on board. We've now learned that the U.S. is sending a rapid response Marine unit to the Middle East as a defiant Iran launched more attacks on its Gulf neighbors and Israel. This new video is showing missile debris in the skies falling over Tel Aviv. And we want to go now to Tel Aviv, where our Jeremy Diamond joins us now live. Jeremy, we appreciate you being there for us. So the US and Israeli bombardment of Iran continues. And as I've just been mentioning, Iran is firing back with missiles and drones. Israel now confirming at least 12 people have been killed. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This war is continuing, and it is certainly intensifying at this hour. We've been watching the strikes that Israel and the United States have been conducting in Iran, as well as the strikes that Israel is carrying out in Lebanon. Across both of those conflict zones so far, more than 2,000 people at a minimum have been killed, according to the health ministries of both Iran and Lebanon. In Lebanon, we know of the 700 plus people who've been killed, at least 100 have been children, and Israel is intensifying its strikes there. We're witnessing not only the impact that the strikes are having, but also these evacuation orders that Israel has now issued for about 14% of Lebanese territory, resulting in over 800,000 people who've been displaced so far. And now the Israeli government still actively considering and preparing for the possibility of a ground operation in southern Lebanon. In Iran, we've witnessed these strikes that Israel carried out in the capital city of Tehran amid this pro-regime rally that was taking place there, where several senior Iranian officials attended in what was quite a stunning show of defiance, given the fact that Israeli officials have in the past and are continuing to target senior Iranian regime officials. Meanwhile, Iran has been directing its ballistic missile fire here in Israel. Tonight, we saw several impacts as a result of what appears to be Iran's continued use of cluster munitions. Using cluster munitions over residential areas is a violation of international law, and that is exactly what Iran appears to be doing. We've seen several of these munitions. Basically, they explode in the sky, dropping, 24 smaller bombs indiscriminately over central Israel. We saw several fires break out on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. No one was seriously injured as a result of this, but we have seen 2 people who were killed last week as a result of one of those cluster munitions. Yesterday, there was also a direct impact of one of these Iranian missiles. Several people were lightly injured, but no serious injuries there as well. And Hezbollah has also intensified its rocket fire on northern and central Israel. So as we're seeing, this conflict is showing no signs of slowing down. And there doesn't yet appear to be any signs of any kind of diplomatic off-ramp in the making.
And just quickly, Jeremy, the bodies of American service members will be heading home soon, and now there's 6 people killed. The defense secretary simply said bad things can happen. What is the U.S. military saying about what happened there?
Well, the U.S. military is insisting that this was not the result of any enemy fire nor any friendly fire. They are pointing to a tragic incident that took place in the skies over western Iraq. 6 U.S. service members died as a result of this incident, and the U.S. military now says it is investigating. We should note that the Islamic resistance in Iraq, an Iranian proxy, has claimed responsibility for downing this U.S. refueling plane, but there's no evidence to substantiate that. Instead, what we've seen is an image of another plane that the U.S. military says was involved in this incident, a second refueling plane that landed safely at Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. And in the images of that, you can see that the tail of that plane has been kind of sliced off in what points to potentially some kind of a mid-air collision. But again, the U.S. military investigating this incident, and hopefully we'll learn more soon about exactly what caused such a tragic incident.
Tonight, as the U.S. military takes on Iran, Pete Hegseth is taking on the media. At a press briefing, the defense secretary took issue with coverage of the war while contradicting his own message in a span of just a few minutes. Here's the first example.
For example,
a banner or a headline. Mideast war intensifies, splashing on the screen the last couple of days, alongside visuals of civilian or energy targets that Iran has hit, because that's what they do. What should the banner read instead? How about Iran increasingly desperate? Today will be yet again the highest volume of strikes that America has put over the skies of Iran and Tehran. The number of sorties and number of bomber pulses, the highest yet, ramping up and only up. And quantity has a quality of number as we continue to ramp up.
Next, Hegseth took issue with how the scope of the war is being presented.
Another example of a fake headline that I saw yesterday: war widening. Here's a real headline for you for an actual patriotic press. How about Iran shrinking, going underground? The only thing that is widening is our advantage.
But the war is widening. More than 24 countries have become involved, either directly or indirectly, some hit by strikes, some sending equipment and personnel, and others like...
When I used to think about counseling, I pictured an office and a couch. Didn't feel like it was for me.
Hormuz. At least 14 ships have been attacked in the Strait or in the Persian Gulf since the start of this war. And as we mentioned in the last block, the president is announcing that Navy ships will soon enter the waterway. But according to Pete Hegseth, there's nothing to be concerned about.
And as the world is seeing, they are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz. Something we're dealing with. We have been dealing with it, and don't need to worry about it. The only thing prohibiting transit in the Straits right now is Iran shooting at shipping. It is open for transit should Iran not do that. The Strait of Hormuz is something we've paid attention to from the beginning. And the American people can rest assured we will ensure that our interests are advanced, no doubt.
Tonight, what exactly is the timeline for when this war with Iran will be over? So far, we've heard weeks, not months. We've heard soon. We've even heard that it's already over. But now Trump has a new answer for that question.
When it's over, and I don't think it's going to be long, when it's over, this is going to bounce right back so fast.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
Well, we're closing in on now the third week of the war with Iran. And tonight, President Trump says the United States has bombed what he calls Iran's crown jewel, a vital Iranian oil hub in the Persian Gulf. Now, this move significantly raises the stakes in this conflict. What you might be wondering about is the timing. Specifically, why does he need to hit it now? Because if you've been listening to Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Iran's military has already been devastated and almost completely destroyed.
Their Navy is gone, their Air Force is gone, most of their military is gone, their big threat is gone in every way.
Iran has no air defenses. Iran has no air force. Iran has no navy. Their missiles, their missile launchers and drones being destroyed or shot out of the sky.
Strikes from Iran, they are down opening days of the war. Hegseth says Iranian missile volume is also down 90%. Drones, down 95%. But Iran is still proving it can threaten the entire global economy. Exhibit A seems to be the Strait of Hormuz, that vital choke point for 20% of the world's oil. Tankers that try to pass through, they're being hit, turned into fireballs, something Hegseth acknowledges.
They are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz. Something we're dealing with. We have been dealing with it, and don't need to worry about it.
No need to worry about, he says. Well, the president put it this way earlier this week. These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts. There's nothing to be afraid of. Well, try telling that to the crews of those ships, the ones who've seen the videos of other tankers erupting into flames. Hegseth said today the United States would not let Iran contest Hormuz. And tonight, looks like we're seeing part of Trump's plan to keep those ships sailing. Because he says the United States has obliterated every military target. Here, Hard Island, on your screen, that's a small Iranian port in the Persian Gulf. It handles about 90% of Iran's oil exports. But if the strikes in its military sites are the stick, well, Trump also left Iran a choice. He says he deliberately did not wipe out the island's oil infrastructure. But if Iran tries to interfere with shipping through Hormuz, he says he will reconsider. So the big question now is, what's Iran going to do? Just yesterday, a top Iranian official warned the country would abandon all restraint if the United States attacked any of its islands. There's another major question underneath all of this. Did the administration fully grasp how willing Iran would be to cause chaos? Why did this island go untouched until now, nearly 2 weeks into the war? Why didn't the U.S. tap into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve until this Wednesday? And why didn't the military announce the bombing of Iranian mine-laying ships until Tuesday? Multiple sources are telling CNN that the Pentagon significantly underestimated Iran's ability to shut down that strait. Now, Hexa says the idea that they didn't plan for that scenario is patently ridiculous. But the timeline raises some questions. And frankly, there may still be more to come.
Mr. President, when will the Navy start escorting tankers through the Straits of Hormuz?
And good evening, I'm Erica Hill in for Aaron Burnett. Out front tonight, the breaking news. More U.S. Marines now headed to the Middle East. According to sources, the Pentagon is sending as many as 2,500 additional Marines and sailors, plus warships, to the region. Now, these units typically have a ground and aviation combat component. The decision to bolster U.S. forces in the region comes just as President Trump was speaking with reporters, saying they've decimated Iran's military. And then in a new post just minutes ago, the president saying the U.S. military, quote, totally obliterated every Iran jewel, Karg Island. It's clear, though, this war is not over, and America's involvement is getting deeper. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said today will actually be the heaviest day of kinetic fires across Iran. And Israel, for its part, not letting up either, going after what it calls terror targets into Iran. You're looking at new video showing blasts. Iran, though, is defiant tonight. Cluster munitions exploding in several locations in Tel Aviv, according to Israeli officials. This video shows you the moment of impact from one of the missiles. The explosions causing this fire, a number of buildings and vehicles destroyed. The war, which is now entering its third week, is also putting more American troops in harm's way. An Iran-backed group in Iraq is now offering more than $100,000 for information on American targets. And at the same time, the U.S. government is offering up to $10 million for information on the top 10 Iranian leaders, which includes the new supreme leader, Moshtaba. Kristen Holmes is at the White House. Jeremy Diamond is in Tel Aviv. Kristen, let's begin with you there at the White House. The president just speaking. What did he say?
Well, before we get to what he said, I do want to go into this breaking news because moments after he spoke, he talked about Karg Island. And this is really a big deal. I mean, 90% of Iran's oil exports go through Karg Island. There have been questions as to why the United States or Israel had not bombed Karg Island, particularly given its economic strength for Iran. It is a place, it is kind of a sensitive area, and it's clearly something that the U.S. could have targeted. President Trump had been asked questions about this. He kind of today. Now, here's what he said. Because there is so much oil infrastructure in this area, he specifically says, I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. However, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. There is a reason why this is so important. Earlier today, I was talking to White House officials. They said there was going to be actions as early as this weekend, as early as this evening, that were going to show how the U.S. was working towards trying to get these ships through the Strait of Hormuz, getting the Strait of Hormuz opened again. That is clearly what they were referring to, was these explosions in Karg Island, a place that had seemed like it was going to be off limits. Clearly here he is saying, open up the Strait of Hormuz or else you're going to see more bombs dropping and more strikes in the area. Now, we did also hear from President Trump just seconds before he sent that Truth Social post saying that those Navy escorts were going to start happening soon. I was told by White House officials they were going to have to clear that area. They have to make sure it was safe for the military, that they were going to have to get the resources there. But he did say the word soon. And one of the more interesting things we heard him say is that he has officially taken any sort of timeline off the table. He was asked specifically about his 4 to 5 weeks comments, and he said that he couldn't give a timeline anymore. So I know that we have been reporting that the administration
administration have been saying this, but this is Donald Trump here officially saying that 4 to 5 week timeline is off the table and instead replacing it with a big question mark.
Yeah, very important. A number of very important developments there. Kristen, really appreciate it. Jeremy Diamond is out front live in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, what more are you seeing here? We were just talking about,
multiple rounds of ballistic missiles towards Israel today, including this evening. We saw multiple impacts in the Tel Aviv area and what appeared to be Iran's latest use of these cluster munitions. These are munitions that release some 24 smaller bombs dispersed over several miles of territory, often hitting residential areas. And that's what we saw tonight. A couple of fires broke out on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. There were no casualties, however, as a result of this fire. Yesterday, also, a ballistic missile made a direct impact in northern Israel, but also no fatalities. Dozens of people, however, were lightly wounded. And this is coming as we're continuing to see Israel and the United States striking Iran very, very hard. As you mentioned, the United States saying that this was one of the most severe days of U.S. airstrikes in Iran, and Israel is also ramping up its strikes. Those stunning images that we saw today of this pro-regime rally in Tehran, an Israeli airstrike in the distance, even as senior Iranian officials were attending this rally. Quite a remarkable show of defiance when you think about it from those senior Iranian officials, considering the fact that they are being targeted by Israeli intelligence and by its military. And this also kind of goes to show, the kind of asymmetric warfare that we're starting to see between Iran and, on the other side, the United States and Israel. Because while the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today talked about Iran having no air defenses, no air force, no navy, we are still seeing that Iran has the ability to still disrupt life here in Israel with those daily ballistic missile fire attacks, and also being able to do things like blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which has gone on now for multiple days. And the United States still doesn't seem to have a plan yet, or at least a timeline for being able to get U.S. Navy ships to start escorting those tankers through that strait. Global markets clearly rattled and disrupted, and the global economy, most importantly, disrupted by all of this.
Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island. Now, this is a crucial piece of land in the Persian Gulf, referred to as Iran's oil lifeline. Trump also just admitting the U.S. and Israel could have different objectives when it comes to ending the war with Iran. This, as another front of the war, shows no signs of slowing down. Israel intensifying its attacks on Lebanon, one apparent strike now being blamed for killing 9 members of a single family, including 5 children. Isabel Young is on the ground in Lebanon, where that airstrike hit.
See quite a lot of damage here. Cars, this big building here. We're in southern Lebanon, actually just outside of the area that the Israeli Defense Forces announced that individuals should evacuate from yesterday. But struck pretty hard. We're told that it was a yogurt factory by the neighbors here. You can see these kind of vats that they say were used to make yogurt. And what we know is that 9 people were killed in this strike, including 5 children. I mean, what the Israeli Defense Forces are saying is that they are targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, and we don't know in this case if that was the situation. But what we can see is that the destruction from here is pretty large, and we're told that the children were playing just on the outskirts of the property here, in this factory and home with their grandparents, and that they were killed. The burials are happening today. It's really heartbreaking. You can see family members behind me who are just walking around trying to look for remnants of their family's belongings. The children's bodies were told are in pieces and are going to take a while to identify the DNA so that they can actually do a burial. You can see up here, there's school books, children's rucksack. We're told by the IDF that they are targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, and obviously we don't know in this scenario if that's the case, but we do know that this area that was struck was...
Continues. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reasons of decency, I've chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. The president then adds, however, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. Now, reports flow, it has gone untouched until now. And when asked earlier today about taking it, the president took umbrage.
I can't answer a question like that. You should ask. Yeah, you should be even asking it. It's one of so many different things. It's not high on the list, but it's one of so many different things. And I can change my mind in seconds. But, you know, if you'd ask a question, who would answer a question like that? I mean, you're asking me a question, Carg Island, okay, everything. Who would ask a question like that? And what fool would answer it, okay? Let's say I was going to do it, or let's say I wasn't going to do it. What would I say? Oh, yes, Brian, I'm thinking about doing it. Let me let you know what time and when it'll take place. It's not, you know, it's sort of a foolish question. A little surprising for you because you're a smart man.
Iran, you'll recall, has to send oil tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz up in flames if the U.S. targets its energy facilities, such as the ones on Carg Island. Now, the president was asked late today whether those ships could expect U.S. protection.
Mr. President, when will the Navy start escorting tankers through the Strait?
The president did not give specifics on that, nor did he specifically cite what constitutes victory in the war when asked about it earlier today.
When are you going to know when it's over? When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
Feels it in his bones. Tonight, Carg Island attack caps day 14 in the war, and what were billed by the Pentagon this morning as the heaviest day of strikes in the fighting so far. This is one of them in Tehran. Strikes in the background as crowds turned out there and across the country to mark a day of solidarity with Palestinians and show their resistance against the U.S. and Israel. Also, we should point out today, we learned that some 2,500 Marines and sailors are headed into the region, and though we don't yet know what this Marine Expeditionary Unit's mission is or may be, they are traditionally used for large-scale evacuations as well as amphibious assaults. The president, as you know, has neither ruled out ground combat, or hasn't ruled it in or out, I should say. We've got Kristen Holmes in Washington, D.C., and Jeremy Diamond in Tel Aviv. I want to start with senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes. So, Kristen, at this point, what are the other details are there about this bombing on Carg Island?
Well, Anderson, look, they're still coming in right now. President Trump saying that he did not strike any of the oil facilities, which is notable. Carg Island is essentially one of the most sensitive economic targets in Iran. It has gone relatively untouched, and experts have said that part of the reason could be the fact that if President Trump was to bomb any of these oil facilities, about 90% of the crude oil exports go through Carg Island, that could actually surge the already surging oil prices, make them even more expensive. However, President Trump saying that he hit several military assets, but not the actual oil facilities, but then tying it directly to the Strait of Hormuz. The reason why this is so critical, I spoke with the White House official Trump saying it could be soon, but the same White House official I spoke to said there was a lot of steps that they would have to go through to get this to happen. They do want it to happen quickly, but they have to completely secure the area. They are clearly now holding this threat of potentially bombing these facilities and going beyond just leaving this area of untouched as a bit of leverage over Iran as they're trying to straighten out what is happening to try and take control of the situation and the movement of the oil. But this is a significant escalation. And Anderson, I can't help but note that answer that he gave to Brian Kilmeade. He answers questions like that all the time. I mean, he answers questions about boots on the ground, about strikes. He got so clearly wrapped around that answer. And it seems as though that's because this was the next target. Just a few hours after that and a few hours before it was actually announced there would be some military action. But the idea that, that was a question he wouldn't answer and the way he answered just goes to show you he was trying.
Yeah, Kristen Holmes, thanks very much. I want to go now to CNN's Jeremy Diamond, who's in Tel Aviv tonight. Jeremy, what have you been seeing there? What more can you tell us about the Carg Island and also the significance it is to the U.S.?
Well, it is a hugely significant island, and there's a reason why we haven't seen the United States or Israel target this island until now, and even now with these initial U.S. military strikes, still avoiding hitting the oil infrastructure at this island. I am learning a little bit more about what exactly the United States did strike on Karg Island. This is from a U.S. military official I spoke with just a few minutes ago. They said that this was a series of wide-scale strikes on this island, but strikes that use precision munitions to avoid hitting the oil infrastructure there. Instead, I'm told that the targets included a naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and other military infrastructure on the island. But there's no question that President Trump's regime, a very clear threat here, what the impact of that actually would be, because should the United States the oil infrastructure on Karg Island, you're going to see a series of short and long-term ramifications for that. Experts have predicted that it could send oil prices, which are already at over $100 a barrel, up to $150 a barrel, because of the fact that not only does Karg Island process 90% of Iran's oil exports, but Iran's global oil supply amounts to about 4% of the global oil markets. And in addition to that, Iran could escalate even further by striking oil infrastructure targets on the other side of the Gulf, in countries that are allied with the United States. We've already seen them carry out a very limited series of strikes on oil infrastructure in some of those countries, like in Bahrain and Kuwait. And so obviously they could escalate even further. And then there's the long-term question here, as the United States and Israel are clearly still pursuing this ultimate goal of regime change. What happens to the Iranian economy, even if
the hot, crispy filet of fish? You either love it or
the lifeblood of the Iranian economy. And so all of that has to be considered as President Trump is threatening to go even beyond what he has done tonight, which is strike only the military targets on Karg Island, and now threatening to go after the oil infrastructure as well.
A residential area on fire in central Israel earlier tonight after an Iranian missile strike. Emergency responders say there were no initial reports of injuries in the attack and others in the area. Also tonight, the president is saying U.S. Central Command has carried out one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East, claiming in a social media post that they, quote, totally obliterated every military target in Iran's Karg Island. Meanwhile, since the war started nearly 2 weeks ago, the president or his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, have deflected concerns over the war, including after sources told CNN that Russia is helping Iran with advanced drone tactics.
You said it is a little excursion, and you said it is a war. So which one is it?
Well, it's both. It's both. It's an excursion that will keep us out of a war.
I got a domestic serve.
No, the scene, they are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz. Something we're dealing with. We have been dealing with it. Don't need to worry about it.
Don't need to worry about it, Secretary Hegseth said today. Now CNN political commentator and Air Force veteran Adam Kinzinger, who served in both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and CNN chief political analyst David Axelrod, who was a senior advisor to President Obama. Congressman, first of all, do you think we need to worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Hegseth just seems like a guy playing the Secretary of Defense on a really bad movie. Like, he's over the top. Nothing worries him ever. He did the old, we don't have to worry about it. The other guy has to worry about it.
With airstrikes by the U.S. on Iran's Karg Island, the war now takes a new and uncharted direction. More on that and where this conflict could land. Joining us is New Hampshire Democratic Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander. She is joining us. She's a Naval Reserve veteran. Congresswoman, appreciate you being with us. I'm wondering what your reaction is to the president's post about bombing Karg Island and what we heard from Secretary of Defense Hegseth today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Anderson. Look, to step back here for a sec, I'm here in New Hampshire, and it is crystal clear to me what the number one concern my constituents and people across this country is. It's the affordability crisis. It's the sky-high cost of living. 2 weeks ago, the president launched unilaterally this war that has been uncharted and unclear in its most basic objectives from day one. What has been clear
and continues to be clear are the extraordinary costs and the costs that are being borne by the American people. We've seen already 13 service members given their lives in this war. The president still can't give a clear explanation of our objectives. We're seeing gas prices surging, food prices on the cusp of surging. We're hearing from farmers who are feeling the pain of the real costs of war. And Anderson, the president seems hell-bent on escalating, and I think this is what we're seeing once again tonight, without any clear objectives.
The administration is pushing back on CNN reporting that they underestimated Iran's willingness to close the Strait of Hormuz. I know you said you essentially don't see a plan here from the Pentagon or the White House. I mean, do you support the objective of essentially trying to neutralize Iran? If that is, I mean, several objectives have been stated, but that's one.
You're right. I mean, it's been a constant shifting set of objectives. The president seems to change his mind about what this war is about every day, multiple times a day. 2 weeks ago, he said this was about regime change. Well, what we've seen is one old supreme leader, radical, replaced with a much younger supreme leader. He's also said this is about Iran's nuclear program. And Anderson, we've had longstanding bipartisan support for the basic objective of preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But so far, the president has nothing to show for advancing that basic objective. He's talked about degrading Iran's military capabilities, Iran's navy. If that's what this is about, Anderson, it's really hard to follow the plot. And this is a huge problem because we've seen this movie before. We know from history what it looks like when you've got a president at the helm who's hell-bent on escalating without any clear objectives or endgame. A president who can't answer the most basic question of how this ends and how this is going to be good for the American people. We've seen this movie before, and the way it ends is in thousands of American lives lost and trillions of American taxpayers dollars spent. And right now, the people I represent can't afford this. We're in the middle of an affordability crisis that the president calls a hoax and a con job, Anderson. But the fact is, I came to Congress to lower costs, and in every relevant sense, from home heating prices to the gas pump to the grocery store, the American people are paying the price of this war.
Congresswoman, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
And as President Trump says tonight, that the United States military, at his direction, has executed what he describes as one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island. Now, Karg Island, for those who don't know, isn't just another target. It's actually the beating heart of Iran's economy. The terminal where 90% of the country's crude oil reaches the world. Strike there, and you're not just hitting Iran, you could potentially be triggering an earthquake in the global energy market. That means the potential of higher gas prices for a longer period of time, but the president says that he believes this will just be a temporary blip.
When it's over, and I don't think it's going to be long, when it's over, this is going to bounce right back so fast.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
The president said the war will end when he feels it in his bones, and despite assurances that he's made publicly that it's almost over, there are signs tonight that point to a U.S. mission that is only expanding. We've now learned that the military is actually deploying thousands of more service members to the Middle East. That includes at least 2,500 Marines and sailors, and that comes tonight as, on a somber note, the death toll has continued to rise. We now know 13 U.S. service members have died over the first 2 weeks of this war. That includes the 6 Americans who were killed in the crash of that U.S. refueling tanker in Iraq. Of course, our thoughts are with their families tonight. And in terms of where this war stands and where we're going, I want to word Joe Marjorie Taylor Greene, and thank you so much for being here. There's so much to talk about tonight with all the developments in Iran. I think first, though, on the 13 service members that have now been killed during Operation Epic Fury, I wonder what goes through your mind when you think of those lives that have been lost already.
Oh, it's absolutely heartbreaking, Caitlin. I'm a strong supporter of our military and the great men and women who serve. I think they're some of the greatest among us, and their families who are so concerned about them right now. These are 13 lives that I believe should not have been lost. This war is not something that Americans voted for in 2024. As a matter of fact, we voted for the opposite. We voted for no more foreign wars, no more regime change. And we were told by many members in the administration throughout the campaign, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, that they believed that going to war with Iran would be a terrible idea. It was something that Charlie Kirk himself had said over and over again. And Donald Trump, President Trump, I voted for him 3 times, fought for him to become president, and I still want him to be successful. But he told Americans for over 10 years and even longer that he thought foreign wars and regime change was really a bad direction for America to go in. And we trusted and believed him that we wouldn't be doing this. But, you know, this was an unprovoked war, and Israel pulled us into it, pulled America into it. And so those are 13 lives that should not have been lost.
Yeah, of course, you know, when the president was asked about that, he argued that maybe he forced Israel's hand in this matter. But I mean, you know, now here we are 13 days in. He's planning on sending more troops to the region, we're told. It's not clear exactly what they'll do while they're there, a Marine group. Is that something you support?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I like many millions and millions of Americans are outraged by this. He never came to America and addressed the nation and gave clear reasons why we would go to war with Iran, especially after he told us back in the summer that he had completely obliterated all of their nuclear capabilities and had even chastised any news organization or media that said otherwise. But here we are in a war with Iran, and it doesn't make any sense. And I'll go further with this. Why are we sending thousands of more U.S. military troops? Why are we sending more of our military resources? Why are we pulling military resources away from other sectors of the world where it's much needed and putting it all there to fight Iran and to have this war in the Middle East? And the reality is there are so many innocent people dying. I mean, the little girl's school is such an outrage. It's horrific. And Americans, we don't want to think of our military as being responsible of killing little children. This is absolutely something that Americans should not tolerate. And we are owed answers. They keep saying that they're investigating, but it is such a serious situation. You know, I drove by an elementary school today, and there were children out on the playground, swinging on the swings and playing on the playground. And I thought to myself, I'm so thankful that our children are safe, but I can't imagine living somewhere where school children or people's children have been bombed or killed. And this is something that has so many people outraged, because I'll go back, Caitlin, we did not vote for this. We voted for an end to foreign wars, and that's exactly what we should be seeing.
On the school, so you don't think that their answers so far have been sufficient on who's responsible for that, given the evidence that points to the United States?
We've got families getting ready to go on spring break, and gas prices are skyrocketing. You know, inflation has barely stabilized, and people voted for lower grocery costs. Well, we're going to see costs at the grocery stores going up because diesel is going up and oil is going up because of this war. We've got 30% of the world's fertilizer goes through the strait. That affects our farmers that are struggling already. We voted to put Americans first. I'm a conservative. I'm the America First wing of the Republican Party. That's how I voted. That's what I fight for. That's what I want to see happen. I want to see Americans put first. And we've got the Republicans in Congress right now. They can't even fund Homeland Security. Our own Border Patrol, ICE, TSA agents, and others are not even getting paid. But yet here they are told that they're going to be voting, and they'll vote for it. Believe me, they love the war. The neocons love the war. They're going to pass a supplemental to fund the war in Iran. What is that going to be? $50 billion or more, while the war is costing us approximately $1 to $2 billion a day. But yet we're not even funding Homeland Security, and Americans are still struggling. And Caitlin, I got to tell you, I'm still waiting on Mike Johnson to roll out that Republican health care plan that he boasted and bragged that he was going to have, because Americans can't even afford health insurance right now.
Yeah, I think you said that this is not what the president's supporters voted for. I mean, you're someone who campaigned for him endlessly on the campaign trail. You know what those voters wanted. And when you talk about those gas prices, they're up 74 cents almost per gallon in Georgia in the last month. The administration said today they have a plan when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which is basically choked off at this point, which is why those gas prices are so high. We're 13 days in. Do you think that they have a plan?
I don't know if they have a plan or not, because they've never made a clear case to the American people why they are bombing Iran. They've never made a clear case why they're supporting Israel while Israel is bombing Lebanon, and while Israel totally grazed Gaza, killing thousands and thousands of people and children. No, I don't think they've made a clear case for this at all. And the reality is, this is something that Americans are so fed up with, and we voted to end it. That's what we voted for, to end all of this. Here we are over a year into President Trump's administration, and we're in a full-scale war with Iran that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. So no, none of it makes sense.
You're someone who once said you thought that there was no one more deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize than President Trump. Obviously, he's long sought one. Do you think that there's any way he could still get one given this war?
At one time when he wanted to be the president of peace and he wanted to end wars and constantly talked about no more foreign wars, no ending wars, of course I thought he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. But do I think he deserves it now? No, absolutely not. And I don't think this is what the American people want. Look, I think there's a big divide, Caitlin, between the baby boomer generation and like Gen X, my generation, and the millennials. Our generations have been the ones that have been sent to fight these wars in the Middle East, and our generations have paid a huge cost, and we want to see it over with. But yet it's the baby boomers that are in power that are just clinging to power, living out the end of their days. It really angers me, Caitlin, because I feel like they're ruining it for the rest of us. They're leaving us with tens of trillions of national debt. Only 7 years from now, Social Security is going to be bankrupt. So me and you, our Social Security payments are going to be basically a tax, and we may never see a Social Security check. So the direction of America and the divide between the generations, where many baby boomers are supporting this war because that's what they've been told on television, where many of us, we get our news from alternate sources and international news, and we know what's going on. Here's the message for the rest of the world. The younger generations of Americans, we don't want war with the world. We want peace. We desperately want peace between all of our nations. We want good trade. We want to have good business deals. And we want to be able to visit your countries and you come visit ours. This is not what we want. This is not what we voted for. And I'm certainly praying for our military troops, and I'm praying for the administration to stop the insanity.
One of the complaints that we heard from Trump world in his first term when I was covering him was that he had the right instincts, but he was surrounded by people who led him down the wrong path or led him astray or didn't let him lead into his instincts. You just mentioned J.D. Vance, his vice president, and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. I still don't even think we've heard from Tulsi Gabbard since this war started. We've heard some comments from J.D. Vance. I wonder what you think of that, given they are obviously key voices in his inner circle.
You know, I can understand they're in a difficult position. They serve at the pleasure of President Trump, and so what I would imagine that's a difficult spot to speak out, but they need to speak out. This is it's going in a direction where we're looking at possible boots on the ground. Many parents are fearful there may be a draft. We are not told like any end goal or how long this may last.
Were reporting that near the march in central Tehran, as large demonstrations took place across the country, state media showed demonstrators burning American and Israeli flags and holding portraits of Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. CNN's Nada Bashir has more details.
Thousands gathered in the streets of Tehran on Friday, chanting even as explosions were seen in the capital. A Friday marked Al-Quds Day, an annual international demonstration in support of the Palestinian people. Iranians in the capital were seen waving flags and chanting defiantly close to where the explosions were reported. In video broadcast by Iranian state media, crowds across the country can be heard chanting anti-US and anti-Israel slogans. Some even burning US and Israeli flags. And the rally comes after a wave of Israeli strikes over the past 24 hours and a new evacuation warning issued by the Israeli military for areas near the rally site in Tehran. The warning was posted on X, but access to the platform is blocked across Iran, meaning many people likely never saw it. Despite the ongoing strikes, Iranian leaders have projected defiance under the country's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei. In a lengthy written message he reportedly issued, which was then read aloud on state TV, he vowed revenge for attacks carried out by the US and Israel. Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, who appeared at the march on Friday, also issued a warning to US President Donald Trump on Thursday, saying in a social media post Iran would, quote, make him sorry for his grave miscalculation, and dismissing any suggestion of a quick victory for the US or Israel.
It was just 4 days ago when President Trump made a stunning declaration that the U.S. had, quote, won the war in Iran. But there appears to be no end in sight. The U.S. struck a critical Iranian oil hub this weekend, and Iran threatens retaliation. The U.S. embassy in Baghdad hit by 2 drones on Saturday. Meantime, Iran's closure of the critical passageway known as the Strait of Hormuz continues to send gas prices soaring, up 77 cents from a month ago, putting pressure on Trump, who yesterday called on other countries relying on that passageway to be involved in a team effort to reopen the critical shipping lanes. A new overnight read on the identity of the 6 airmen killed in Thursday's plane crash in Iraq. That's bringing the number of U.S. troops killed in connection to the war to 13. This is the U.S. is sending a group of Marines to the region. So for more on all this, let's go to CNN's Nick Robertson, who is live for us in Kuwait City. So Nick, are any countries biting at Donald Trump's demand to help secure the Strait of Hormuz?
It appears at the moment as if the Gulf countries are really trying to ride out the current situation. We heard, of course, from the Iranian foreign minister of the IRGC ramping up the rhetoric, saying that they're going to go after U.S. commercial, particular oil interests in the region. We've had the advisor to the president of the UAE saying that the Gulf countries are doing their best to sort of find a resolution to this, and that Iran is just upping the ante, making the situation more difficult. In the skies here in Kuwait, this is the Gulf right behind me, in the skies here, hearing fighter jets, they generally go up to defend against incoming missiles. Overnight, there were strikes here, hitting drone strike getting through defenses, hitting a military airbase in the south, a drone strike getting through to the civilian international airport, damaging radar equipment, 3 Kuwaiti service personnel injured. South of here in Riyadh, 10 drones intercepted around the capital, ballistic missiles fired at that key Prince Sultan airbase just outside the capital, again intercepted, but that is an airbase where the U.S. Air Force operates out of. In Qatar, there have been attempted strikes by Iran in the last few hours, and in the UAE as well. They've been intercepting ballistic missiles, drones. Bahrain, the sirens going off there. Jordan, also reports of sirens going off. So Iran is keeping up its drumbeat of attacks, perhaps at a lesser pace, but the impact is being felt. The countries here trying to stay out of it. The mood is that potentially there could be some diplomacy, but they're not seeing it materialize. Indeed, what I'm hearing from sources here is that the message they're getting from Iran is that the price Iran wants for a diplomatic off-ramp to unblock the Straits of Hormuz is too high a price to pay. Unclear what that is at the moment, but diplomacy really taking a sideline to the talk with Iran's weapons that's going on here right now.
This morning, President Trump is calling on other countries to help secure safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump specifically called on China, France, the UK, and others to help. Shipping traffic has been at a virtual standstill in the strait, caused gas prices to spike. In a new interview with MS Now, Iran's foreign minister disputed the claim that the strait...
At Thomas Express Car Wash, we know how to love your ride. Try the Works Wash with our signature 14-step cleaning process, engineered to shine and shield your car from the elements. From breaking down dirt and bugs with our Detox Pre-Wash to restoring your vehicle's finish with our ceramic body wax. Give your car the best with our Top Wash. Then complete the clean with free vacuums and mat washers. Download our app and get your first 30 days of the works for free. Tommy's Express. Love your ride.
To keep the strait open and safe. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along or in this waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. He added that he hopes, emphasis on hopes there, that China, France, South Korea, and the United Kingdom will be sending ships. In the meantime, he says that the United States will be bombing the shoreline. Now, in a separate post, he reiterated his calls for other countries to help secure shipping in the passage, adding that he believes this should have been a team effort all along, and now it will be. He said the United States will be helping with coordination to ensure that this is done quickly, smoothly, and well. And this comes as America impact here, as there is a surge in gas prices. And while Trump has said he is confident those will eventually go down, this could be an attempt to ease some of those growing concerns. Iran's foreign minister has denied claims that the strait is completely closed, instead saying that they are blocking vessels with ties to the United States and Israel. Victor?
All right, Julia, thank you. President Trump defended his decision to temporarily ease sanctions against Russia's oil industry. In an interview with NBC, the president said he wants the world to have oil and that the sanctions would go back as soon as the crisis is over. But Virginia Democratic Representative yesterday called the lifting of sanctions unacceptable.
You know, the Russians are our adversary. They're not our friend. And the president is just waving his hand at this, like, well, we support the Ukrainians, they support the Iranians. No, this is American blood and American treasure. We have had 13 casualties. Not to take this seriously is frankly outrageous. For him to lift sanctions at this moment is obscene and completely unacceptable. We need to hold this president's feet to the fire on this point.
The U.S. military says North Korea has launched several ballistic missiles. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command says yesterday's test launches do not pose an immediate threat to staff or allies in the region. CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley has the latest.
North Korea says it launched a barrage of a dozen nuclear-capable rockets in its latest show of force. It's the third major weapons test this month, part of a steady drumbeat of launches. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un watched over the weekend. Standing beside him, his teenage daughter, believed to be named Kim Ju-ae. She's been appearing a lot more frequently at major military events and is widely seen as a possible successor in training. South Korea and Japan say they detected about 10 ballistic-type projectiles fired from near Pyongyang's airport. The weapons flew more than 200 miles before hitting targets at sea. Analysts say the timing is likely a response to the ongoing U.S.-South Korea Freedom Shield military exercises, drills Pyongyang has long called a dress rehearsal for invasion. But the war in Iran may also be looming in the background. Some experts say Kim may be signaling that North Korea's nuclear arsenal is meant to prevent exactly the kind of strikes it's now facing, reinforcing Pyongyang's long-held belief that nuclear weapons are the ultimate guarantee of the leader's survival. Just last week, Kim and his daughter also oversaw cruise missile launches from North Korea's new 5,000-ton warship, part of a broader push to modernize the country's military. At the same time, there are fresh hints diplomacy could reemerge. South Korea's prime minister says President Donald Trump asked him at the Oval Office last week whether President Trump might want to meet again. President Trump is expected to return here to Asia later this month, raising the possibility that even as weapons tests continue, talks could also come back into play. Will Ripley, CNN, Taipei.
Strikes lit up the sky above Tel Aviv in the latest attacks from Iran and Hezbollah. Authorities said munitions fell in several locations in central Israel. Emergency crews said 2 people were injured, but no deaths were reported. New video geolocated by CNN shows thick plumes of smoke over Isfahan in central Iran. It's not clear what caused the smoke, but Iranian state media is reporting several points in the city were targeted by missiles from U.S. and Israeli fighter jets. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's not ready to make a deal with Iran to end the war. He's also urging other countries to help the U.S. secure the Strait of Hormuz by sending warships to the Middle East. But some lawmakers back home are still not convinced the Trump administration has a plan.
This administration entered this war without a plan. They're a real plan. Their current plan is based on hope that American air power is sufficient to bring the Iranians to their knees, and hope that the Iranian people rise up against this regime. And over the course of the last 2 weeks, I've not seen anything that looks like the Iranian people are in a position to rise up. And air power so far has not been sufficient to open the Strait of Hormuz. So I want to see a real plan. I want to know what the achievable objectives are.
All right, let's talk more about these angles with CNN's Nada Bashir in London and CNN's Elena Jacobs in Dubai. Nada, let's start with you. The latest on the strikes overnight. What do you know?
We've heard recently now from the Israel Defense Force stating that the Israeli military carried out what they've described as a massive wave of attacks against Iranian regime infrastructure in the west of the country. We had, of course, heard reports of large explosions and a potential strike, according to state media, in the city of Isfahan. We've seen video which CNN has geolocated, which shows thick plumes of smoke over the city, and we have been able to hear from one resident of the city who described the scene as horrifying, and that buildings in the vicinity of these apparent strikes were shaking from the impact. And of course, this comes following a continued wave of strikes carried out by the US and Israeli military. Just overnight into Saturday, we saw a significant strike on the Haraj Island, a 5-mile strip of land off the coast of Iran, which is essentially an oil hub for the country. It handles some 90% of Iran's crude. Now, President Trump has said that all military targets on the island were targeted, but that the U.S. military did not target oil infrastructure, but indicated that could be next if Iran fails to allow ships to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Iranian regime has been very clear. Any attack on its oil or energy infrastructure would trigger a like response from the Iranian regime on U.S. energy and oil infrastructure assets in the region. They have issued fresh warnings to civilians living in the UAE, for example, and in the region near U.S. assets, and they have said to evacuate these areas for their safety. At this stage, no clear indication of the scope and potential scale of this threatened attack.
Nada Bashir reporting in London. Thank you. And new this morning, President Trump says that he's not ready to make a deal with Iran to end the war. In an interview with NBC, the president claimed that it's Iran that wants to make a deal. He also questioned whether Iran's new supreme leader, Mustafa Khamenei, was alive. That's because the supreme leader has not been seen publicly since taking over after his father was killed. CNN's Elena Jacobs is with us with more. Elena.
Very good morning. A lot happening. You've got this rhetoric from President Donald Trump saying he's not ready to make a deal. The terms are just not good enough. A lot of questions around the status of the new Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei, saying he doesn't believe that he's alive. There are a lot of narratives that are moving across, not only from Iran, but also from the side of the United States. But most notably, Victor, we saw a post on social media calling on allies to come and assist vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz, and he called on France, the likes of Japan, South Korea, the UK, interestingly China. But we've had reaction to this, and I think a lot of analysts that I've spoken to this morning saying, isn't it interesting that the US is saying they've always been ready for disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, but yet took to social media to request this naval assistance. Japan says that any naval deployment would face high hurdles. South Korea saying they're going to communicate closely and make a decision after careful consideration. China, the embassy in Washington, not deciding to say whether they're going to deploy or not, but they're calling for cessation of hostilities. The UK is discussing with allies how to safely get vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, what we're seeing happening there is the reason we've got high oil prices. We're seeing major squeeze on oil and, of course, a huge disruption. That's what the International Energy Agency has warned on, that this is the largest disruption of oil in global markets ever. And it just shows how acute this issue is. The fact that President Trump had mentioned insurance guarantees for vessels trying to pass through the strait last week, and also promising naval escorts, it seems that that is still weeks away. The shippers that I've spoken to saying they have not heard any indication of assistance. In the meantime, Iran is saying they have complete control of the strait and only allowing vessels to pass that they have given clearance to.
Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky tells Afariz Zakaria that Russia has significantly aided Iran in the war with the U.S. and Israel. Here's some of what he said.
Do you have intelligence or any information about this report that the Russians are providing Iran intelligence, specifically providing Iran with intelligence on where American troops are, where American assets are, so that the Iranians can strike and kill Americans?
First of all, Russia gave drones already. These they are using Iranian licenses, that they built and produced a lot of drones. They gave them. I have 100% that the Iranian regime used against American bases and against our Middle East, and Middle East neighbors of Iran. They used these drones. We saw intelligence shared with us some details, and it was Russian details in these Iranian drones. This is the first. And the second point is my intelligence told me next that they think that they share information, intelligence with Iranian regime. They help them. And also, my intelligence told me that they said if Europe and United States can help Ukraine with intelligence in this war, it means that Russia can help Iranian regime. This is the secret.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, right now, Iran is lashing out after the U.S. says it obliterated military targets on its main oil export hub. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is urging all Americans to leave Iraq immediately after an official tells CNN the building was struck by 2 drones today. Video geolocated by CNN shows smoke and flames pouring out of a tower near the U.S. Embassy. And in the UAE, smoke was seen rising from a major oil hub after a reported drone attack there. Iran is warning of even further escalation, vowing to reduce U.S.-linked energy sites across the Middle East to, quote, a pile of ashes, end quote, if its oil infrastructure is targeted. I want to go straight to CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson. He is in Kuwait, which has also been attacked by Iran during this conflict. Nick, what more can you tell us about these strikes and threats?
Yeah, look, it does seem that Iran is following through on its words to up its attacks in the Gulf. I mean, just in the past hour or so, we've heard that the sirens have been activated, air raid sirens activated in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. In Saudi Arabia, Prince Sultan Air Base outside the capital there has been targeted again. That's the air base where we understood that several of the air tanker refueling aircraft, the KC-135s, have been damaged. President Trump has said it was just minor damage. We know that in Qatar there have been a number of incoming ballistic missiles and drones that have been intercepted today. The UAE has taken, again, the sort of highest preponderance of incoming missiles. And here in Kuwait, in the last half an hour, we heard that drones impacted the civilian airport, Kuwait International Airport here. The Civil Aviation Authority said that the radar equipment in the airport was damaged. No indications of casualties there. But just a few hours earlier, the armed forces here in Kuwait said that 3 service members have been injured. Drone strikes earlier on today. There have been 7 drones, 3 intercepted, 2 fell in open areas, and 2 hit the Ahmed Al Jabba Air Base, which is just north of Kuwait City, where we are right now. Sirens have been going off here in the evening as well. You wouldn't sort of sense that from the sort of busy activity in the street behind me here, and I think that's because people here in Kuwait and elsewhere in the Gulf understand or believe that they are not the targets. Is threatening, as we've heard from the Foreign Minister and from others there, to target US-associated infrastructure, commercial infrastructure, oil infrastructure in the region. And of course, we've heard that the US Embassy in Baghdad was hit by a couple of drones in the last several hours, and the instruction within the last hour or so from the US State Department is for Americans to immediately leave Iraq, suggesting via Saudi, where the airlines still work from the capital, Riyadh.
And then, Nick, what about Kuwaiti residents? What are they saying to you? I see a lot of, activity behind you, so it looks like some people are going about their biz, but what have they said to you?
Yeah, look, setting the scene a little bit. Last few days of Ramadan, holy time of year. It's Eid al-Fitr, the sort of festival at the end of Ramadan in a few days' time. People typically come out and buy gifts for family members, and that's what we're witnessing. There were huge tailbacks on the highway getting here around the major shopping malls. People here going out. And I think part of it, in Kuwait, it's slightly different from the rest of the Gulf, where really this was the first time they've been impacted in war. It was terrifying and it was a new experience. But Kuwait is here 30 odd years ago. That's when Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the brutal dictator there, invaded Kuwait, and they were occupied. Thousands of people killed here over a 7-month period. President Bush led that big international coalition back in 1991 to oust Saddam Hussein. And back then, the Kuwaitis were traumatized. So when I ask people to compare then with now, they say, look, it's not as bad as it was back then. It is dangerous. This isn't our war. We don't want this war. But we spoke to an air traffic controller here, former air traffic controller, and he said, look, we believe in our defensive systems. They're intercepting 98% of all incoming missiles. That may be a bit above what we're witnessing at the moment. 4 Kuwaiti service members have been killed here, more than 90 people, military civilians have been injured. But I think what you see on the streets here is reflected in a confidence in the defensive systems and a confidence that Iran is targeting. It may be just a few miles away, but not the people directly.
All right, Nick Robertson in Kuwait, thank you so much. We'll check back with you. Also today, new CNN reporting outlines just how the White House is scrambling to contain the fallout after deciding to attack Iran. CNN's Julia Benbrook is joining us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, near where the president's home is in Mar-a-Lago. What are you learning, Julia?
Well, we're now entering that third week of this conflict, and President Donald Trump, he's back in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago estate, which is where he monitored those first joint U.S.-Israel strikes against Iran. And according to new reporting from our CNN colleagues, prior to those strikes, there was intelligence that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, as well as other top officials were going to be meeting. And that led the U.S. and Israel to accelerate plans for those attacks with the goal of taking out the regime's top leadership at once. And those strikes were successful in killing the Supreme Leader and dozens of high-ranking officials. But that could have created another issue going forward, as some that the administration had considered as options to potentially lead Iran in the future were also taken out. That's something that Trump addressed publicly in the days after, saying that some of the people that they had in mind were now dead. Now, when it comes to an exit strategy here, there are still a lot of questions. According to people who are familiar with some of those internal deliberations, the administration does not seem to be any closer to articulating a detailed exit strategy. And that comes as there have been many different timelines laid out. Trump himself at one point said this could last days through the week. Of course, we're well past that now. And most recently, he's been saying 4 to 5 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks, but adding it will be as long as it takes, whatever it takes. Now, when he was speaking to a group of Republican lawmakers last weekend, he said, we've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. And I had a chance to press him on what those comments meant, what his baseline was here. And he said, in part, when they are not going to be starting the following day to develop a nuclear weapon. He added that they needed to be able to look to negotiators like Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who was in the room at the time, and to confirm that they did not have plans to pursue it. Now, since the start of Operation Epic Fury, 13 American service members have been killed and roughly 140 wounded.
And then, Julia, the president commented today on the Strait of Hormuz saying, I'm quoting now, many countries, end quote, will send warships to keep it open. Any more about whether that is indeed the case? Promises being made by certain countries?
And he's now posted about this twice, so it is obviously top of mind as 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. His most recent post, he said that this always should have been a team effort and that other countries need to be joining in. But I want to pull up his first post. That's where he provided some more detail. In it, he said, many countries, especially those who are affected by Iran's attempted closure of Hormuz Strait, will be sending warships in conjunction with the United States of America to keep the strait open and safe. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along or in this waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. He added that he hopes, emphasis on hopes there, that China, France, South Korea, and the United Kingdom would be sending ships, and that in the meantime, the United States would be bombing the shoreline.
All right, Julia Benbrook in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thanks so much. All right, let's continue this conversation now. Let's bring in Michael Allen. He is a former special assistant to President George W. Bush for national security. Good to see you. Iran, continues its retaliation, not just against the U.S., but also, its neighbors in the Middle East. In your view, are we nearing an end of Iran's capacity for significant retaliation, or is this really just the beginning?
Well, I think we have significantly degraded their ability to get ballistic missiles off, and also less so their ability to shoot drones. But I still think we're a long way from a conclusion to this. The Iranians don't seem to be seeking an exit ramp. If anything, as you say, they're trying to ramp it up a little bit. They're hitting U.S. bases wherever they can. They're trying to hit our allies. And the entire Straits of Hormuz action, of course, is to show that they have leverage. And it's designed to put pressure on the United States to get out of this conflict and seek a ceasefire sooner rather than later.
Right. And in fact, Iran has said it will be seeking out U.S. energy sites and may potentially reduce them to now piles of ashes. That those are the threatening words coming from Iran. Is it? Can it achieve that?
Well, it's unclear what they mean. I mean, I don't know how many of these energy sites we have. As you know, we're largely self-sufficient over in the United States with a few exceptions. But I don't doubt that they want to try and maximize the price of a barrel of oil. I think any constriction of supply hurts everywhere and puts everybody back up at the top of the pump. So I do believe that they are going to seek additional asymmetric ways to hit and hurt the United States. So we need to remain vigilant on this and a dozen other things.
Okay. Iran's new supreme leader hasn't been seen. At least the globe hasn't seen him, but they did hear a statement being read by someone else, on state television. What do you think is happening behind the scenes? Is it powerful that there is this ominous figure that no one has seen, but it's been stated that there's a new supreme leader? I mean, is there leverage with that? Is there fear or threats that come with that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's mysterious. I sort of believe two different theories. One, I think he probably is injured. By all accounts, he was in. Israelis might swiftly, and they have vowed to do it, kill him also. So it may just be the way he's going to operate for a little while, because I think the last thing the Iranian regime wants is to have to go through another succession crisis. That just complicates things for them, and it makes people believe that they, especially their own citizens, that they may be insecure and vulnerable to another march out on the streets.
All right, hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield, and we begin with the latest on the escalating war with Iran. Today, Iran is retaliating after the U.S. military says it destroyed missile storage sites on Iran's Karg Island, the country's main oil export terminal. President Trump says the U.S. obliterated the island's military sites, avoiding for now riskier oil infrastructure. After Iran vowed to hit back against energy sites linked to the U.S., a security official says pro-Iran militias have attacked an oil refinery in Iraq. This comes as the U.S. embassy in Baghdad was hit by 2 drones. The U.S. State Department is urging U.S. nationals to leave Iraq now. And Iran's military says ports and docks in the United Arab Emirates are also in its crosshairs. Video taken today shows plumes of smoke pouring out of a major oil hub in the UAE after a drone attack there. But as the war's impact on the global economy grows, Trump is warning there could be more attacks, threatening to bomb Iran's oil sites if the country continues to block ships from passing through the vital Strait of Hormuz. CNN international correspondent Nana Bashir is in London with more on the significance of the Karg Island attack and how Iran could escalate the war even further.
Well, Frederica, given the fact that the Iranian regime has maintained a very clear message when it comes to its oil infrastructure, that any attack on its energy sector would trigger a fierce response from the Iranian regime and its military. Clearly now, this has shifted the playing field somewhat. President Trump announcing that the U.S. had carried out significant overnight strikes on Karg Island, as he mentioned, a strip of land just off the coast of Iran. And it's an island which is an oil hub. It handles some 90% of Iran's crude exports. Now, according to the U.S. president, in his words, every military target on Karg Island was struck by the U.S. military. He described this and characterized this as one of the most powerful bombing raids in Middle East history. Now, we are waiting for further confirmation on the details of the scope and scale of this attack. It is understood that oil infrastructure on the island was not hit, was not However, President Trump has suggested that this could be next if Iran fails to allow vessels to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we've heard from Iran's new supreme leader from a purported statement written by him, read out on state TV. They have vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed as a pressure tactic. But of course, this has really caused upheaval in the shipping industry, in the oil market as well. And so President Trump has vowed to push even harder if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Of course, we are also hearing new threats today from the Iranian regime, as you mentioned, with regards to ports in the United Arab Emirates. They have accused the US of using ports in the UAE to carry out such attacks. And as they have previously warned, they have warned their neighbors that any military bases, any assets like ports being used by the US would be, in their eyes, a legitimate target.
All right, Nada Bashir in London, thanks so much. Today, Iran is launching new strikes in the southern part of Israel. CNN's Oren Lieberman is in Jerusalem with more on the attacks and how Israel is responding.
Iran has launched several waves of ballistic missiles at Israel throughout the course of the day here. It is the 15th day of the war. One of those missiles, according to Magen David Adom, Israel's emergency response service, injured 2 people in the southern Israeli city of Eilat, right in the tip of southern Israel there. One of those, a 12-year-old boy who was seriously wounded. Other missiles were intercepted or didn't cause any injuries, but we have seen reports of damage across parts of central Israel and in Jerusalem here. So it's unclear whether that's shrapnel or cluster munitions, as we've seen Iran use throughout the course of the war, that split up and were able to pierce Israel's aerial defenses. Meanwhile, Israel carrying out more strikes on Iran, and in particular in Tehran. The Israeli military says they targeted the Iranian Space Agency as well as manufacturing capacity for Iran's aerial defenses. So Israel's still working its way down that extensive target list, with all the indications now that this will continue either intensifying or at this intense pace for many days, if not weeks. Meanwhile, on Israel's northern border, it remains an intense fight with the Iranian proxy Hezbollah as well. According to Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health, one Israeli strike on a town in southern Lebanon killed 12 health workers. That strike was on a medical facility, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. That, as the number of people killed in Lebanon since the start of the war, nears 800. Israel keeps carrying out strikes targeting Hezbollah, not only in southern Lebanon, but in particular in the capital as well, that area of Dahya that's considered a Hezbollah stronghold. Israel has also warned both Lebanon and Hezbollah that it may target civilian trucks and ambulances, saying Hezbollah is using these to transport weapons and rockets. So that's obviously something we'll keep an eye on as well.
Oren Lieberman, thank you so much. All right, also today, new CNN reporting outlines just how the White House is scrambling to contain the fallout after its decision to attack Iran. CNN's Julia Bedbrook joins us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, near the president's home in Mar-a-Lago, where he's spending the weekend. Julia, what are you learning?
Well, as we enter now the 3rd week of this conflict, President Donald Trump, he's back here in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago estate. That's where he monitored those first US-Israel strikes against Iran. And then, according to new reporting from our CNN colleagues, prior to those strikes, there was intelligence that showed that Iran's Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, as well as other top officials, were going to be meeting. And that led the U.S. and Israel to accelerate plans for the attack, with the goal successful in taking out the Supreme Leader and dozens of high-ranking officials. But also potentially that creates another issue, as some that the Trump administration had considered as potentially leading Iran in the future were also taken out. That's something Trump acknowledged publicly in the following days, as he said most of the people we had in mind are dead. So then there's the focus in on an exit strategy here. And according to several that are familiar with internal discussions, the administration does not seem any closer to being able to articulate a defined strategy for bringing this conflict to an end, as it becomes more and more complicated by the day. As we've heard timelines, there have been a variety of predictions from Trump. At one point, he said it could last 2 to 3 days, through the week. Of course, we're past that now. He's recently been saying 4 to 5 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, but emphasizing it will be as long as it takes, whatever it takes. Just last weekend, he was speaking to a conference of Republican lawmakers also in Florida, and he said, "We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough." Taking a step back to some of the briefings that have been held on Capitol Hill, we know that both Republican and Democratic lawmakers pressed top officials on the objectives for the war, the potential timeline, and then the longer term outlook as they account for the ripple effect that will take place. And lawmakers who were in the room for some of those discussions said that they did not get a lot of specifics on those questions.
Okay. And then, Julia, the president commented today on the Strait of Hormuz saying that, quote, many countries will send warships to keep it open. Any more details on that?
Yeah, in this post, he said they will. He also said he hopes. So we are seeking clarification on exactly what the plans look like here. But I want to pull up part of this for you. He did this in a social media post just hours ago now. And he wrote, quote, "Many countries, especially those who are affected by Iran's attempted closure of the Hormuz Strait, will be sending warships in conjunction with the United States of America to keep the strait open and safe. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along or in this waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are." He then added that he hopes China, France, South Korea, and the United Kingdom will send ships. He said that the United States will be bombing the shoreline in the meantime.
All right. Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield, and we begin this hour with the spiraling conflict in the Middle East. Today, Iran is striking back after President Trump's U.S., quote, totally obliterated, end quote, military targets on Karg Island, a key stretch of land handling nearly all of the country's oil exports. After Iran promised retaliation for the attack, a security official says the U.S. embassy in Iraq was hit by 2 drones. Video geolocated by CNN shows smoke and flames rising from a building near the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. And Iran's military says ports and docks in the United Arab Emirates are also in the crosshairs. Plumes of smoke pouring out of a major oil hub in the UAE after a drone attack. But as the war enters its 3rd week now, Trump is warning there could be more attacks threatening to bomb Iran's oil infrastructure if the country continues to block ships from passing through the critical Strait of Hormuz. I want to bring in now CNN international correspondent Nada Bashir. Nada, just how significant are these U.S. strikes on Karg Island?
Well, look, Frederica, given the fact that the Iranian regime has maintained a very clear message when it comes to its oil infrastructure, that any attack on its energy sector would trigger a fierce response from the Iranian regime and its military. Clearly now, this has shifted the playing field somewhat. President Trump announcing that the U.S. had carried out significant overnight strikes on Karg Island, as he mentioned, a 5-mile strip of land just off the coast of Iran. And it's an island which is an oil hub. It handles some 90% of Iran's crude exports. Now, according to the U.S. president, in his words, every military target on Karg Island was struck by the U.S. military. He described this and characterized this as one of the most powerful bombing raids in Middle East history. Now, we are waiting for further confirmation on the details of the scope and scale of this attack.
Not everyone can handle high performance, and a special few can operate.
However, President Trump has suggested that this could be next if Iran fails to allow vessels to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we've heard from Iran's new supreme leader from a purported statement written by him, read out on state TV. They have vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed as a pressure tactic. But of course, this has really caused upheaval in the shipping industry, in the oil market as well. And so President Trump has vowed to push even harder if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Of course, we are also hearing new threats today from the Iranian regime, as you mentioned, with regards to ports in the United Arab Emirates. They have accused the US of using ports in the UAE to carry out such attacks. And as they have previously warned, they have warned their neighbors that any military bases, any assets like ports being used by the US would be, in their eyes, a legitimate target.
And then, Nada, what more can you say about these attacks on the U.S. embassy in Iraq?
Frederica, we're still waiting to get more details on the extent of this attack, but according to one security official, the U.S. Embassy compound in Iraq was struck by 2 drones. Now, at this stage, the extent of the damage or possible injuries is unclear. We have seen video, which has been geolocated by CNN, which appears to show plumes of smoke and fire emerging from a building in the vicinity of the embassy compound. But at this stage, those details around the extent of this attack remain unclear.
All right. Nada Bashir in London, thanks so much. We'll check back with you. All right. Also today, CNN has this new reporting outlining just how the White House is scrambling to contain the fallout after its risky decision to attack Iran. CNN's Julia Benbrook is joining us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, near the president's home in Mar-a-Lago, where he is spending the weekend. Julia, take us into the administration's decision-making process and the efforts to now contain what looks like a lot of fallout from this conflict.
Yeah, new reporting from our CNN colleagues shows that prior to those first attacks, there was intelligence that showed that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, as well as his top officials were going to be meeting. And that led the United States and Israel to accelerate plans for the attack in hopes of taking out the regime's senior leadership all at once. Those strikes were successful in killing the Supreme Leader, as well as dozens of high-ranking top officials, but could have created a potential issue going forward, as some that the administration had eyed as potentially leading Iran in the future were also taken out in those attacks. That's something that Trump addressed publicly as well, saying that many that they had eyed for that potential role were now dead. Now, when it comes to an strategy here, according to several who spoke with CNN about some internal deliberations, the administration does not seem any closer to being able to articulate a defined strategy for bringing this conflict to an end. And this as it grows more and more complicated by the day. We have heard Trump predict many different timelines in these last couple of weeks, at one point saying it could be 2 to 3 days or through the week. Of course, we're past that now. Most recently, he said it would last 4 to 5 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, but emphasizing that they'll be there as long as it needs to be, that it will, whatever it takes, that's how long this will last and involvement will last. Just last weekend, he was speaking with a group of Republican lawmakers, and he said, we've already won in many ways, but added, we haven't won enough. And I did have the chance to press him on that specifically, asking him what his baseline was for bringing this conflict to an end. And he said, in part, when they are not going to be starting the following day to develop a nuclear weapon. He added that they need to be able to look at negotiators like Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and confirm that they are not going to pursue it.
And then, Julia, the president did comment today about the Strait of Hormuz, saying that, quote, many countries will send warships to keep it open. Is that firm or is that wishful thinking?
Well, in this post, he did this on social media. He said that they will be. He also said he hopes. So we have reached out to the White House for clarification on this post, but I want to pull up part of it for you now. In it, he said this. He said, many countries, especially those who are affected by Iran's attempted closure of the Hormuz Strait, will be sending warships in conjunction with the United States of America to keep the strait open and safe. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along or in this waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. He then added that he hopes that China, France, South Korea, and the United Kingdom would be willing to send ships, so the United States would continue bombing the shoreline in the meantime.
We're going to see in the newsroom. I'm Victor Blackwell. Good to have you along. And we start with the breaking news. Iran's military is warning that it could target ports and docks in the UAE. Moments later, video into CNN showed huge plumes of smoke rising from a major oil hub in the United Arab Emirates near the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump said Friday the U.S. bombed every military target on Iran's Karg Island that handles 90% of the country's crude oil exports. U.S. Central Command said the strikes on Karg Island hit more than 90 military targets. And according to Iranian media, no oil infrastructure was damaged in the attacks. We're also following reports that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was hit with a missile strike. You can see smoke and flames rising from a building near the embassy compound. Reuters cited security officials who said this was a missile strike, but it is still unclear the extent of the damage. Let's go to Lebanon now. At least 12 medical workers were killed when an Israeli strike hit a healthcare center. This was in a southern Lebanese town. The country's health ministry says doctors, paramedics, and nurses were among those killed. Of course, we have team coverage on all angles from CNN's Oren Lieberman in Jerusalem, Paula Hancock's in Abu Dhabi, and Julia Benbrook in West Palm Beach. Oren, I'm starting with you. And these images of the damage to the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad, what can you tell us?
Victor, let's walk through the region here because there is a lot to get through on what is a very busy 15th morning to the war here as I come to you from near Jerusalem. First, on the front in Iran, as you pointed out, Iran has continued to lash out. We have seen that with not only those fires at oil and tanker facilities in the UAE, but across the region as well. Iranian officials had said that if the U.S. or Israel targets Iran's energy infrastructure, it will set oil and gas infrastructure in the region, quote, on fire, and perhaps we're beginning to see that. Meanwhile, as you pointed out, there is smoke and damage visible in Baghdad at the U.S. Embassy facility there. It's unclear what the projectile was, but Iran has targeted U.S. facilities, in particular there, with rockets and drones in the past, so it's certainly possible this was another one of those attacks. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Israel continue to target Iranian facilities, including the Iranian regime and its military. As you pointed out, Karg Island, a small island in the Persian Gulf off Iran's coast, where some 90% of the country's crude exports flow through. There, U.S. Central Command said they destroyed 90 military targets on the island, but left its oil and energy infrastructure untouched. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump was asked what he would do with Karg Island. Would he attempt to seize the island? He was asked that question over the course of the past 24 or 48 hours, but wouldn't specify what U.S. plans there are when it comes to Karg Island. Meanwhile, Israel has struck into Iran again. The military there saying it's going after the Iranian Space Agency, as well as production facilities for Iran's air defense capabilities. Iran, again, has been able to strike back. In fact, within the last hour here, we got two different sirens warning of incoming missiles, and we got an alert from Israel's emergency response service, Magen David Adom, that two were injured in southern Israel as a result of those incoming missiles. So the war with Iran, very much hot and intensifying on a daily basis. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz continues to be a focus as we see increasing oil prices and gas prices across the U.S. Iran has effectively closed it, but is also able to control it. And we see that from India's foreign ministry saying two of their tankers were able to cross their critical waterway. And that suggests that it's not just the closure that Iran is going after with the Strait of Hormuz, but effective control over who goes through that critical waterway through which some 20% of the world's crude oil exports travel on a daily basis. Switching to Lebanon and Israel northern border for just a quick minute here. Israel continues to go after Hezbollah, targeting what they say are Hezbollah targets in Dahya, the southern suburb of Beirut, and also issuing warnings that they will target ambulances and civilian trucks because they say Hezbollah is using those to transport weapons and to transport rockets as we see continued fire across the northern border. As you pointed out there, the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health said an Israeli strike on a medical facility in southern Lebanon killed 12 medical workers as we see the number of people killed in Lebanon near 800. Victor.
A lot of activity this morning and overnight. Oren Lieberman joining us first. Thank you. Let's take another look at the smoke from a fire burning at an oil port at the UAE. Debris from an intercepted drone fell this morning near the Strait of Hormuz. Officials say no injuries were reported, though sources say some operations were suspended. And this comes hours after U.S. strikes on Iran's Karg Island. As Oren discussed, Iran has warned that ports and docks in the UAE could be targeted. CNN's Paula Hancock is with us now from the UAE in Abu Dhabi. What do you know?
Well, Victor, we've certainly seen the UAE has been singled out for the most amount of missiles and drones over the past 2 weeks. another threat from Iranian officials that it will be targeted even more. This is the latest that we have heard from the spokesperson of the armed forces. It comes after the U.S. attack on Karg Island, even though it was military targets that were taken out. We did hear from the U.S. president saying it could be oil infrastructure next if the Strait of Hormuz is not back to normal. So I'll quote what we heard from this statement saying, "We warned the UAE leadership that the Islamic Republic of Iran views as its legitimate right to strike the origins of American missile launches, those concealed in ports, docks, and shelters." There are still a lot of questions. We have heard a variety of options from the president, from 2 to 3 days through the week. Of course, we're past those now. Most recently, he's been saying 4 to 5 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks. But adding the important note, whatever it takes, as long as it takes, is the overall message there. And this comes, Victor, as we're getting some new reporting from our colleagues, giving a bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what's taking place. According to roughly a half dozen people familiar with internal deliberations, the administration does not seem any closer to articulating a defined strategy for bringing this conflict to an end. And we've seen that in some of Trump's public comments as well. In fact, just last weekend, he was speaking to a room full of Republican lawmakers, and he said that we've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. And when it comes to the way Americans are feeling this directly, that pain at the pump that we've seen as these gas prices soar, Trump does not seem to be concerned. At one point saying, if they rise, they rise. And as he has said that, he said his administration knew, describing this as a short excursion. He knew that these gas prices would go up at least for some time, but that he is confident they will eventually come down. And of course, part of that is because about 20% of the world's oil travels through the Strait of Hormuz, which has come to nearly a complete stop. Now, the administration has said that the U.S. Navy would be willing to escort some oil tankers through the strait. When Trump was asked about this last night as he traveled out here to Florida, he said that that would start happening soon, very soon. But we've still been looking for specifics on that timeline and how that would work. And then, of course, very important to note here, the big impact, 13 Americans have died since the start of Operation Epic Fury, and more than 140 have been wounded.
And the president says that the U.S. has destroyed every military target in Iran's Karg Island, critical crude oil export hub. Iran state media says that no oil infrastructure was damaged at the site. Tensions rising as Iran threatened retaliatory strikes against U.S.-linked oil facilities in the region if its own energy infrastructure is attacked. This morning, new video into CNN showed huge plumes of smoke rising from a major oil hub in the UAE near the Strait of Hormuz. Local authorities said the blaze broke out when debris from an intercepted drone fell. No injuries were reported. CNN's Nada Bashir joins us now. Nada, what's the latest on these strikes on Iran overnight?
Well, this is certainly a significant step taken by the United States. As you mentioned, President Donald Trump said that all military targets on Kharj Island were targeted overnight. This is a 5-mile stretch of land just off the coast of Iran. It handles some 90% of Iran's crude exports. So this is certainly a significant target for the United States, although it is said that no oil infrastructure was targeted at this stage. And Iran has been clear that any targeting of Iran's oil infrastructure on this island will trigger a response by the Iranian regime, by the Iranian military, targeting any oil-connected assets to the United States, and U.S. interests in the region will then be targeted also. And of course, we've heard similar warnings in the past from the Iranian regime. There has been calls from Iran's new supreme leader, from the Iranian regime, for all U.S. bases in the region to be shut down. Otherwise, attacks on these bases will not come to an end. And of course, we have seen, again, just reminders of that in the rounds of attacks we've seen on the UAE and other nations in this region. And of course, now we are hearing this latest warning from the Iranian regime. They've accused the UAE of allowing the US military to use docks and ports to carry out those overnight strikes on Kharj Island. They have said that they may begin to target UAE docks and ports. So that will certainly be a point of concern for the United Arab Emirates as they continue in their defensive attempts. And of course, the UAE government has been very clear. They say they remain in their defensive posture and are not part of this offensive campaign by the United States and Israel. But of course, we've also seen a round of deadly and devastating attacks by the United States and Israel on Iran. Some 42,000 civilian units, according to the Iranian regime, have been damaged as a result of those attacks since the war began. And of course, while the Iranian regime has attempted to paint a picture of resilience and strength against the United States, there doesn't seem to be any sort of off-ramp being offered by either side of the conflict at this stage.
And we begin with the breaking news with the war in Iran. Major fallout in the Middle East today after last night's strikes on Iran's main oil export hub. The U.S. military says it destroyed dozens of mine and missile storage sites on Kharg Island while, quote, preserving oil infrastructure. Iran today vowing retaliation after the Kharg Island attack. The country's military warning it will destroy U.S.-linked oil and energy infrastructure in the region if its energy sites are attacked. A source tells CNN 2 drones struck the American embassy in Iraq. Video geolocated by CNN shows smoke and flames shooting out of a building near the U.S. compound in the capital of Baghdad. And in the UAE, smoke was seen rising from one of the country's main oil hubs after a reported drone attack there. I want to go straight now to CNN's Nada Bashir in London. Good to see you, Nada. So how significant are these strikes, especially on Kharg Island?
Well, this has certainly raised the stakes. Kharj Island has been somewhat left out of the intense bombing campaign that we have seen over the last 2 weeks. But overnight, as we've heard from the US President Donald Trump, Kharj Island was struck. President Trump has said in his words that every military target on the island he described and characterized as one of the most powerful bombing raids in Middle East history. Now, Kharj Island is a strip of land just off the coast of Iran. It is one of the key oil hubs. It handles some 90% of Iran's crude exports. So this certainly is significant. Analysts believe that if there is a continuation of the targeting of Iran's oil and energy infrastructure, for example, that could send oil prices into chaos. Now, important to note that Iran's oil and energy infrastructure on the island has not been struck, according to U.S. officials. However, President Trump has indicated that that may be the next step if Iran does not allow for vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. If we continue to see continued attacks on vessels attempting to pass through this key shipping route. And of course, we have heard from the Iranian regime threatening retaliation after these overnight strikes, including targeting any oil and energy infrastructure related to U.S. companies or U.S. assets and interests in the region if the U.S. the Iranian regime with regards to the United Arab Emirates today. The Iranian military claims that UAE ports and docks were used by the United States to carry out these overnight strikes that we have seen. The UAE has maintained that it is holding a defensive position. It is not involved in the US and Israel's offensive military strikes, and has warned civilians to stay away from key ports and docks in key UAE cities.
And then, Nada, what can you tell us about this strike of the U.S. Embassy in Iraq?
Well, we are still getting more information regarding this strike. According to a U.S. security official, it is understood that the U.S. Embassy complex was struck by 2 drones. Now, we have seen video emerging, which CNN has geolocated to a building near the U.S. Embassy, which appears to show smoke billowing out of the building and flames. And of course, there is concern for the broader security of this embassy complex. We have reached out to U.S. officials for further clarification on what exactly occurred and whether there is any more detail on what may have caused this strike, of course, and the extent of the damage and injuries, which at this stage are not clear. But of course, this comes at a time of heightened concern around the security of U.S. bases, officials, and diplomatic, of course, bases in the region. The Iranian regime has said that in terms of the ongoing military campaign, the Iranian military will continue to target U.S. assets, including not only military assets, but also potentially diplomatic assets in the region. So real raised concern there, of course, for the entire region over other neighboring nations, which could also come under attack.
All right. Nada Bashir in London, thanks so much. So as the war in Iran enters its 3rd week now, there's new CNN reporting today about President Trump's risky decision to attack the country and the scramble to contain the fallout. CNN's Julia Benbrook is joining us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president was spotted earlier today arriving at his golf course. Julia, take us into the administration's decision-making process, the efforts to contain this fallout now from the conflict.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Fred, President Donald Trump, he is back here in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago estate. That's where he monitored those first joint U.S.-Israel strikes against Iran. And according to new reporting from our colleagues at CNN, prior to those attacks, there was intelligence that showed that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, as well as other top officials were going to be meeting. And that led the United States and Israel to accelerate their plans to attack in hopes of wiping out the senior leadership of the regime all at once. Those attacks were successful in killing the Supreme Leader and dozens of other senior officials. But that creates potentially another issue going forward, as many that the Trump administration had eyed to potentially play a leadership role going forward were also wiped out in those strikes. Trump even has addressed that publicly, telling reporters in the days after those first strikes, most of the people we had in mind are dead. Now, when it comes to the focus on the exit strategy here, what's next? Roughly a half a dozen people who are familiar with some of those internal deliberations have expressed that the administration is not much closer to being able to articulate a defined exit strategy. And this as the conflict grows more and more complicated by the day. When it comes to timeline, we've heard a variety of predictions from Trump himself. At one point, he said it could last 2 to 3 days through the week. Of course, we're past that now. He's recently been saying 4 to 5 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, but emphasizing that it will last as long as it needs to, whatever it takes. And as he spoke with Republican lawmakers last weekend, he said that we've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. And I have a chance to press him on that, what his baseline is for bringing this conflict to an end. And he said, in part, when they are not going to be starting the following day to develop a nuclear weapon. He added that they needed to be able
sounding in Israel earlier this week. Iran vows to ramp up its retaliatory strikes after one of their key oil sites were hit.
Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest. What's the latest there on the ground, Trey?
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. After the 8th round of incoming Iranian missiles since midnight, we do have some new video to show you of an impact this morning in central Israel. This video shows a cluster impact in Tel Aviv. You can see on the security camera provided by the Israeli police this explosion. No one was injured in this particular impact, but there are reports of injuries on the outskirts of Tel Aviv after an apartment was hit by one of these cluster munitions. Overnight, missile interceptors soared through the skies of central Israel, shooting down some of this incoming fire. It's been a difficult evening for the Israeli people who spent much of their time in bomb shelters amid these incoming Iranian attacks. A deputy police spokesperson talking about what happened overnight.
As a result of the missile impact, it caused fire on several vehicles and damages to several buildings. Together with the forces of the Home Front Command, the MDA service, and the security forces at this stage, we found that 3 people were lightly wounded. At the moment, we are working to inspect the inside buildings to see that there are no one trapped inside, and of course, sealing off the scene.
Now, this comes as the Israelis are launching new strikes against the Iranian regime. You can see this video from Friday. They are hammering the Islamic Republic and many of these launching positions and the stockpiles of ballistic missiles. International attention remains focused on the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, where the Iranians are still issuing new threats about this critical thoroughfare.
The Strait of Hormuz will not be. Not a single American Navy vessel will be allowed to enter the Persian Gulf. The presence of America in the Persian Gulf has been the main cause of insecurity over the past 50 years. It is not possible to establish security in the region without America's exit from the Persian Gulf.
The Iranians are talking and the Americans are striking. U.S. Central Command releasing this video from Friday showing Karg Island, where up to 95% of Iran's crude oil is processed. Significant strikes there. President Trump telling media over the weekend, we totally demolished Karg Island, but we may hit it a few more times just for fun. We've totally decimated it. We do expect a ramp up in U.S. and Israeli strikes in the hours and days ahead. We've seen many of the refueler planes overhead as they are making sure these jets have the ability to strike targets deep inside.
All right, Trey Yingst, live for us in Tel Aviv. Trey, thank you very much.
Thanks, Trey.
And with that, let's bring in Fox News anchor and Fox News chief legal correspondent Shannon Brame. And Shannon, you saw Trey's report there, but back here at home, we've had 4 different terror-related attacks in New York, in Michigan, in Texas, in Virginia, and yet you have DHS funding still not being done. Democrats, with the exception of John Fetterman, everyone is holding out. Chuck Schumer doesn't seem to realize that this sentiment is growing, that DHS needs to do its core mission of security for. What do you make of what's going to happen in Washington this week?
Yeah, and we are now asking more than 100,000 employees within DHS and its various agencies to show up to work without a paycheck. And of course, we consider them essential. They are. So we're asking a lot of these people. And I'm going to be asking Congressman Jim Himes and Congressman Mike McCall today what their plan is on Fox News Sunday to get this thing moving, because Democrats and Republicans alike have been sounding the alarm over the last few years through various administrations, saying that the threat level we have now here on the homeland is so over the top. You remember Christopher Wray, when he was heading up the FBI, said that there were flashing red lights everywhere. That has not changed.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because you see that the administration is going to put Mark Wayne Mullen up for this the hearing. Do you think that will speed things up? And also, you know, with the war in play and these terrorist attacks that you're talking about right now, we looked at some polling showing that the country is pretty split on 60% believe that Iran is definitely a threat, 61%, 50% say that we should go to war. The other 50% say no, according to this poll that we just looked at this morning. A terrorist attack would really set those polls, those numbers in the wrong direction for the president. So really imperative ahead of this election for President Trump to make sure that the homeland is secure, and the funding is a big part of that.
Yeah, and we all know that the folks who work DHS and all those agencies within that umbrella are working 24/7 to make sure that not one bad dude or cell falls through the gaps and creates havoc. As you said, we've already lost people who have been killed in the last month or so through various attacks here on the homeland, but we're always having to be aware. And we have since 9/11, the creation of DHS, about those problems here. You mentioned Markwayne Mullin. Okay, he's a senator now. I think that makes him a little bit more palatable in going through this confirmation process. These are his friends. They know him.
CNN's Jeremy Diamond with more.
Well, it is a hugely significant island, and there's a reason why we haven't seen the United States or Israel target this island until now, and even now with these initial U.S. military strikes, still avoiding hitting the oil infrastructure at this island. I am learning a little bit more about what exactly the United States did strike on Karg Island. This is from a U.S. military official I spoke with just a few minutes ago. They said that this was a series of wide-scale strikes on this island, but strikes that use precision to avoid hitting the oil infrastructure there. Instead, I'm told that the targets included a naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and other military infrastructure on the island. But there's no question that President Trump's military action on Karg Island tonight is intended to send a message to the Iranian regime, a very clear threat here that the United States is willing to strike that oil infrastructure should Iran not change its posture as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz. But I think we really need to consider what the impact of that actually be, because should the United States strike the oil infrastructure on Karg Island, you're going to see a series of short and long-term ramifications for that. Experts have predicted that it could send oil prices, which are already at over $100 a barrel, up to $150 a barrel, because of the fact that not only does Karg Island process 90% of Iran's oil exports, but Iran's global oil supply amounts to about 4% of the global oil markets. And in addition to that, Iran could escalate even further by striking oil infrastructure targets on the other side of the Gulf. In countries that are allied with the United States. We've already seen them carry out a very limited series of strikes on oil infrastructure in some of those countries, like in Bahrain and Kuwait. And so obviously they could escalate even further. And then there's the long-term question here, as the United States and Israel are clearly still pursuing this ultimate goal of regime change. What happens to the Iranian economy, even if the regime does change, if you destroy and dismantle something that is really the lifeblood of the Iranian economy? And so all of that has to be considered as President Trump is threatening to go even beyond what he has done tonight, which is strike only the military targets on Karg Island, and now threatening to go after the oil infrastructure as well.
And the impacts continue. The U.S. State Department is now ordering non-emergency government workers and their families to leave Oman due to safety concerns. Travelers also being warned to reconsider visiting Oman due to this ongoing war with Iran. A level 4 do not travel advisory was also issued for Oman's border region with Yemen. That is the State Department's highest warning for U.S. travelers, indicating life-threatening risks. For more on what's happening on the ground now, let's go to Matthias Greitz. Matthias, it's good to see you again. What is the situation there? Are there still concerns that we could see more strikes?
Well, it had been a relatively quiet 36 hours or so for us here in Doha. The last incident or warning we had of any kind came at around midday on Thursday, but that all changed overnight last night. The first in a series of incidents was an evacuation notice issued by the Ministry of Interior to people's phones to evacuate 2 different parts of the city. And then that was followed at around 1:30 this morning by emergency alerts sent to our phones, and then a loud series of explosions overhead. And then again, just before 6 a.m. this morning, another alert and more explosions. And I have to say that the explosions overnight, in particular those around 1:30 this morning, were among the loudest and most powerful, if not the loudest, that we'd heard so far here in Doha's West Bay. I mean, the force with which it shook the building that I was staying in was quite incredible. And maybe around an hour ago or so, we saw a gun-mounted helicopter here patrolling the skies over West Bay. This area is, of course, where CNN is based. It's where a lot of our staff are based. And it's a really popular commercial and residential area, both for locals and for foreigners. And in the early hours of this morning, Qatar's Ministry of Defense did confirm that it had been subjected to 2 separate missile attacks overnight. But this is something we're now seeing across the region. Authorities in Dubai there said that debris from a successful drone interception struck a building in, but that there was no fire and no casualties. And like you mentioned there at the top, non-emergency US government personnel are being told with their families to leave Oman. The Saudi Ministry of Defense said that over the last few hours, they've intercepted at least 19 drones and 1 missile. In Kuwait, we've seen explosions. In Bahrain, they've heard sirens there. And all of this coming after, of course, the Iran threatened retaliatory strikes for those US strikes on Karg Island.
Specifically, some breaking news at this hour. I want to show you some brand new video that shows some smoke and some small flames rising from a building near the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. Now, at this point, it is unclear exactly what happened. CNN has reached out to the U.S. State Department for more information. You see that smoke billowing from that area near the compound, the embassy compound. And this incident does come just days after a suspected Iranian drone hit a U.S. diplomatic support center near Baghdad's airport. More on this developing situation as we get new information. Iran, for its part, is now threatening to retaliate after the U.S. said that it bombed every military asset on Karg Island. And that's according to Iranian state media, which reports no oil infrastructure was damaged. The island handles about,
if you're an entrepreneur or a creator that wants to scale their online business, that's why we created the Think Media Mastermind.
I have so much more clarity as to my ideal target audience now, which means my content is about to be so much better and more targeted towards the exact person I'm trying to reach.
Super intimate, high-level strategy.
I had the skills that I already knew sharpened. I feel like I went to my next level.
For entrepreneurs and creators that want to scale with YouTube.
This was the first time that I was able to
President Trump says that the U.S. Navy will soon intervene in the Strait of Hormuz, where the flow of oil has been effectively paralyzed because of the war with Iran. A senior Iranian official telling CNN that Iran is now considering allowing a limited number of oil tankers to pass through the strait, but that's only if the oil cargo is traded in Chinese yuan. The Iranian foreign minister actually spoke about oil prices on Friday at a rally that was held for there. I want you to listen to some of his comments.
Oil prices are on the rise, and this is the result of Israel's and America's actions. They must be held accountable.
And as global markets closely watch the situation in the Middle East, oil prices, they have now hit their highest level since July 2022. Let's go live now to CNN's Paula Hancock, who's following every step of the developments of the Middle East from Abu Dhabi. Paula, what do we know about this, about Karg Island, and also why it's just so significant to the United States?
Well, Paulo, this is an island that is really key to the ability of Iran to be able to export its crude product. As you say, 90% of crude exports are from this particular island. It's a tiny island. It's about 5 miles, 7 kilometers. And what we know from the Iranian side, we heard just from the parliamentary speaker saying that they would abandon all restraint if there was any aggression against Iranian islands. Now, clearly, everyone in the region is bracing itself for whether or not there will be retaliation from Iran for the U.S. decision to bomb that island. Now, what we've heard from the U.S. side is that they have just eliminated the military aspect of the island. So the military targets have been taken out, according to the US President Donald Trump, and they have not touched the energy infrastructure. They've not touched the facilities that would be needed to continue the oil production on that island. We've heard from President Trump saying, for reasons of decency, we have chosen not to wipe out all oil infrastructure on the island. But we have been hearing from Iranian officials that if energy infrastructure was targeted in Iran, then they would do the same in the rest of the Gulf. To be fair, that's a kind of a belated response, because they have already targeted a large number of energy infrastructure in the Gulf nations. Just a quick look at what else we have been seeing in neighboring countries in the Middle East. In Baghdad, so we saw that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, in the vicinity of that compound or within the compound, there has been a strike. We understand from Reuters, they have quoted security officials saying that it was a missile strike. We have reached out to the State Department to find out exactly what it was. We can see plumes of smoke and fire emanating from there. It's one of the biggest U.S. embassies in the world. It's within the so-called green zone, which is supposed to be the more heavily protected area. And it has come under repeated missile and drone attack by Iranian proxies for a long time now. We've also been seeing protests outside this embassy in recent days. Now, the non-emergency personnel had already been ordered to leave Iraq, as they have been in many other countries. In fact, Oman is another country where they have just ordered non-emergency staff to leave the country. Significant, because Oman was the mediator between the US and Iran before these hostilities started. They were the ones that had brokered the negotiations between the two sides. And yet even they are finding themselves on the receiving end of Iranian retaliation. Now, we've also seen in Dubai, here in the UAE, another interception of a projectile has caused debris, which has damaged a building. We've seen that over recent days. In Qatar, a missile was intercepted on the way to the military base. And in Saudi Arabia, some 19 drones have been intercepted. All right.
CNN's Paula Hancock's to come back to us if you get more information on the situation in Baghdad. Lebanon's capital is currently reeling from the latest round of Israeli strikes as the fighting shows no signs of letting up. The Israeli military has now been bombarding Beirut after it says that Hezbollah militants fired rockets toward Israeli territory. But it's often Lebanese civilians who end up in the crosshairs of Israeli strikes. Lebanon now says that about 700 people have been killed since the war started. But Israel is now raising the stakes, telling its military to prepare to expand its ground operations in Lebanon. I want to get more analysis on that developing situation right now. Joy Bob. All right, let's go back to a story that we're closely following out of the Middle East as the U.S. and Israeli war with Iran enters now yet another week. Video geolocated by CNN showing flames and smoke rising from a building near the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. This is video that came in just a short while ago. It's still unclear if the compound itself was directly hit. You can see the flames and the smoke. CNN has already contacted the U.S. State Department for any further comment. We continue to do so to get more information. Gulf states are trying to fend off fresh strikes on their territory. And this is President Donald Trump says the U.S., quote, totally obliterated every military target on Iran's Karg Island, which actually handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. And this follows the strike. Iran is now warning that any attack on its energy infrastructure will lead to retaliatory strikes on regional facilities with ties to the United States. For more now, I want to bring in CNN producer Matthias Grez, who is live from Doha. Matthias, welcome back. I've been following your reporting on what life is like there in Doha just a few days ago. Now, as we enter yet another week of this war, what's it like today?
Well, it had been a relatively
That's good. Shut up. Dog. Bitch. So. Bicycles and bicycles. You want to see a blizzard we're having out here? Dang windy, man. Like 60-mile wind. Snow. Well, I think the snow has calmed down. Going to work.